This is Ken Hance, best storyteller in Texas, and we have a great treat for you today. We've got Vicki Hollub. She's CEO of Oxy. She is the first woman to be CEO of a major oil company. And I've followed her for years, and I've interviewed her before. I've always been impressed with her. And Vicki, thanks for joining up with us this morning.
I'm glad to do it. It's always fun.
It is. And one of the things I like about interviewing you, I like to go back to your parents and tell me about them. And you've got a great story. And, you know, these were people like my parents. They didn't have a bunch of money, but they taught us good fundamentals of hard work.
Exactly.
But tell us a little about your mom and your dad.
Okay, I grew up in Bessemer, Alabama, and when I was growing up, the first thing that I remember that my parents exposed me to in a big way was listening to Alabama football on both the radio and watching it on television, watching not only the game, but watching Bear Bryant's Sunday morning assessment of the game. So we were all into football, and they built that into me. Sometimes I'm happy about that, and sometimes I'm not.
You're more happy than you are sad, I can guarantee you that.
Yeah, so I enjoy football, and that played a big part in my life, and not only during school, but in my career. So I have that, first of all, to thank my parents for. It really made a difference for me. And not only that, though, my father was a carpenter. He didn't graduate from high school, but he was incredibly smart, and he taught himself carpentry by, at night, studying this massive volume of carpentry books that had been put together, and he became an apprentice in the Carpenters Local Union and worked his way to a point where he became ultimately the most sought-after remodeler of homes in Birmingham, Alabama. And he was one that most of the homes that he would walk in today, he would demolish them. If the corners aren't exactly 90s, and if everything's not exactly level, he wouldn't allow it. Everything was perfect that he did. He made sure of that. So the work ethic that I saw him do, and the commitment and the passion, and knowing that if you really want something and you're passionate enough about it, you can do it, you can achieve it. And it was that studying every night that they got to me and really made a difference for me. But then on my mother's side, my mother also didn't graduate from high school. And one of the most impactful times in her life is when she decided that she wanted a diploma, she wanted a GED. She went back and she studied for it. She went over and she passed her GED, and that was one of the happiest days of her life. And looking back on it, I wish I had celebrated that more with her, but we did celebrate it. But now, looking back, I understand how important that was to her. But she was ultimately successful anyway. She went to work for Sears at the local mall, and the town we lived in for a long time didn't have a mall. We had just the local barbecue places and restaurants and little stores, but in downtown Bessemer. But when we heard they were building this big mall, which happened to not be so big in today's terms, but they were building a mall, and Sears was going to be one of the anchor stores. She went over and interviewed and got the job to be a salesperson in the women's clothing department. And her friends found out about it, so they would go over there and they would just gather in the women's clothing and have chats and visit and everything, and it attracted people, and so people started buying clothes as they went down to see her. She did so well, they promoted her to assistant manager, and was still doing incredibly well, bringing customers in, and so they then tried to promote her to manager. She didn't want that because there were a lot of other things associated with being manager of the department. But she was successful, and from my mother, the biggest thing that I took, and it was reinforced later in life when she actually passed away, but it was her way with people. She loved people. She loved being around people. She was a magnet, and people just wanted to be her friend. And what I found out when she passed away is that she was not only a friend to those that she knew, she had this intuition, and she could meet a stranger and meeting a stranger, she could figure out if the person, needed some encouragement, needed a conversation, just needed a smile or whatever. And she had this ability to make people's days better. And so that had a big impact on me. As I was growing up, it was impactful to see her personality and how she dealt with people. But what was most impactful when she passed away is for me to realize that as I talked to people. And one of the things I figured out is sometimes we don't tell people how impactful they are to us. We don't tell people how they make us feel, and we don't help people understand what's so good about them until they pass away. And then we tell the stories and all of that. So I think we should tell those stories when people are still living, tell it to them whenever we can. And what I try to do now is I try to be the person that she was and the person that she wanted me to be.
Well, you've definitely done that. And, what a background to have two parents like that. You saw them work hard. You saw the love they gave you. And, your basic fundamentals of your personal foundation are great. And you were lucky enough to get the right parents at the right time.
And I had no idea we were poor at the time.
That's right.
Never imagined that because my life was so happy back then. And then by the time I could realize what money meant and what you could do with it, by that time, my father was already making more money and had a steady job and was successful.
Helping people remodel their house.
Yep.
I had a guy help me remodel the house one time, and he got a bunch of my money because he needed to buy supplies, and he left.
Uh-oh.
And I always figured I was going to do a lot of damage to him if I ever saw him, but I never did see him, so it's probably best for me to, learn on that one.
We all learn from everything.
We do. Alabama fan, you grew up as a little girl, Crimson Tide, and you go to Alabama, and you don't major in engineering at first.
Nope.
And tell me about that story. I think it's great. About the French horn.
Yeah, well, I was in my high school band playing French horn, and I was good enough to make all-county for several years. But what I realized is that when we would get to all-county, we would hear these other kids from the richer schools talking about making all-state. And one year I'm thinking, nobody from our high school's ever made all-state. We never even have tried out for it. So I encouraged one of my friends, he was one of my best friends, to practice and to go to all-state and try out for all-state. And he was a trumpet player. He was incredibly good. And he said, Vicki, I don't want to do that. And I said, you got to do it. We got to have somebody there. And so I said, I'll do it with you. I'll go try out with you. And so we decided to go. And we got down there to Montgomery where the tryouts were. And I did my tryout. He did his. And then about a week later, we get a call, and I made all-state, and he didn't. And my lesson from that was, and I tried to get him to practice a little bit, but I really didn't think he needed to, and he didn't think he needed to, and he didn't. And what I learned from that is perseverance, is getting back to what my father did, is every night, every spare minute I had from the time we decided and registered to go try out for all-state, I was practicing. And I was determined that I wouldn't miss a minute. And can you imagine my poor parents? We lived in a house that was probably 1,000 square feet or so, if that. And so could you imagine having to listen to me practice French horn?
Every night? Wow.
Night, on the weekends.
I'm going to sleep early tonight, honey.
But they put up with it, encouraged it, and they were happy about it. And I made it. But now I understand I really wasn't that good, but I made all-state. And still, the last time I checked, I was still the only one to make it from my high school. So I thought I was good. And so I knew I wanted to go to Alabama. It was my passion. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to major in, so I figured that I would major in music because I thought I was good at that. I go down there, and if you're majoring in music, you have a private instructor for your primary instrument. And so my instructor was working with me, and at the end of the first semester, he said, Vicki, what is it that you're aspiring to do? And I said, I want to play in the Philadelphia Philharmonic or Boston Symphony. And he goes, well, he said, we need to talk then. He said, how about being a band director? And having remembered what we did to our band director in high school, there's no way I wanted to be a band director. And so I was depressed, thinking I got to go try to do something else. And so I went home that weekend to tell my parents and thought I would get a lot of sympathy. And they said, great, let's go out and have dinner, because you're gonna go into something that's gonna help make you more money and maybe even happier. So that's how I got to Alabama.
And so you were in mineral engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't called petroleum engineering.
That's
it was
right.
mineral engineering. And I had a friend, he's a billionaire now, and he went to Texas Tech, and somebody at one time asked him what he majored in, and he said he was in pre-business. And they said, what's pre-business? He said they called it mechanical engineering at the time. He didn't make it, but it turned out best. So the French horn didn't make it, but mineral engineering made it.
Yeah.
How many females were in mineral engineering?
Not many, and at that time, what made me go that route is I thought I failed at music, so I want to go into something where at least if you fail at it, people might understand why. And so we had a lot of coal mines around our house at the time, so I thought I'll go into coal mining engineering. So it was a mineral engineering school, and they had 3 degrees. You could major in mining, or coal processing, or petroleum. And so my major was going to be in coal mining until I got this opportunity to go down into a coal mine. It was a Jim Walter mine. And so we went down, and it was like, oh my God. It was cold, it was dark, it was damp, and I got claustrophobic. And I thought, if I'm going to major in something, it's got to be something that I feel comfortable with and I'm happy with. So I came out of that field trip kind of depressed, thinking, oh no, here we go again. I've got to do another change. But luckily, I stuck it out. And a few weeks later, a month later or so, we went on another field trip. And that time it was to a drilling rig not too far from Tuscaloosa. This was a massive thing to me. They were drilling a deep well, I found out later. But this is it was so interesting. We pull onto this location outside in the atmosphere, and we're looking at this huge thing, and they're running tubing, or at the time, drill pipe in and out of the well, and they were pulling this bottom hole assembly up and looking at all these tools, and I thought that was just fascinating. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do. And I did no research on it. I just decided this is my career. This is what I want to do. I never imagined that it would take me away from the state of Alabama for essentially the rest of my life. But I'm glad I couldn't. We didn't have the internet at the time. I couldn't research it and figure that out. But went into it, and fortunately for me, I loved it. It's been so exciting to be a part of this industry.
At that point in time, you had never heard of the Permian Basin, probably.
Oh no, I had no idea.
And it turned about being a big part of your life.
Yes, it is.
And I want to come back to the Permian Basin in a moment, but you graduated and then took a job with City Services?
I did.
And tell me about that.
I chose to go to city service for 2 reasons, and one was that when I graduated was in '81, and in '81 prices were going back up again. Oil prices were going up. It was perfect timing for me to graduate. I interviewed with 12 companies, got 11 offers. Exxon didn't make me an offer because I told them by that time I already had 10 offers, and I told them I'll take a job in the Pensacola office, but that's the only place I'd go with them. And they clearly didn't like that, as I wouldn't have liked that. So I didn't get an offer there. But looking at the rest of the offers I had, the closest offer where I would get to live to Bryant-Denny Stadium was City Service in Jackson, Mississippi. So that was one of the criteria. Second criteria is, what does it look like from a future perspective? And city service at the time would allow the starting engineers to work in each group, each of the engineering groups for at least 6 months and up to 9 months or a year. And so I knew I would have the opportunity to figure out what are the subdisciplines within petroleum engineering do I want to do? And I'd get to see all of that, and so I took the job with them.
So you got a great education of the company in a short period of time.
I did.
So they were looking at you for future leadership, giving you some indication of what each segment was going to be like.
That's right, and they did it with all the starting engineers, and so we all got to move around and network and share with each other some of our learnings.
You were in Jackson, Mississippi, and you probably city-wise, you have someone that's petroleum engineer that you or your people they interview now, and what do they say? They said, well, we're going to put you in Hobbs, New Mexico. Some go, well, I don't want to go to Hobbs or something like that. But for opportunities, you went, you had some criteria, but you went someplace that wasn't highly sought after, and you learned a lot.
Learned a lot.
City Service, they got bought, and you were there when that happened.
Yes, about a year after I took the job with City Service, I was on a flight to Denver for a training class, sitting beside a guy who said, and we started chatting, found out who he worked for, he found out who I worked for, and he said, oh, see, he said, you guys are getting bought by Occidental. And I said, no, we're not. and I had not heard.
They had checked with you.
They didn't, I'm thinking I'm an employee of Occidental, I don't know this, so it can't possibly be happening. But then I found out a couple of weeks later it was happening. And so at the time, thinking that we were getting bought by Occidental, I'd heard a little bit about Occidental. I thought they were a company that sort of would shoot from the hip and not so much engineering and not so much, a focus on details. So I wasn't as excited. But luckily, I gave it a chance and found out that there were just a lot of innovative people with Oxy, and you bring the more family-oriented and people-oriented group of people from city service, merge it with a company that is innovative and just had this knack for doing things differently. And the combination of the two, some feel like in a reverse way that cities ended up managing it all and running it, but Oxy had a foundation of success around the world at the time that was unique. And so we've never lost that part of our DNA.
They've never been afraid to take risk.
That's right.
And sometimes those risks are not risk. They didn't. I think some people thought, Vicki Hollub, she's a girl. Is she going to be able? That wasn't a risk. They knew who you were.
I would say, I don't know that anybody would have ever called me the best engineer around, but the one thing that I think people could have said about me is that I worked hard and I worked diligently and was persistent, and I think that part they saw.
You were trying to help somebody get in the all-state band. You were still doing that as someone in their profession, and it paid off for you, and it paid off for a lot of those people too. So I think that says a lot about you, and a lot of perseverance, and I've had some other CEOs. One his favorite word was persistence. Mm-hmm. Perseverance, the same thing, and that you were. Arm & Hammer. How did you know him or?
I never got the chance to meet Arm & Hammer, but I did study a little bit about him and what he did for our company, and I'm very proud of what Arm & Hammer did for our company. Without Arm & Hammer and his innovative way of thinking about things, we wouldn't be here today. And because he came into the company, he and his wife invested money in this small California company that 3 guys had started, and they were struggling and barely making it. He came in and he put his money in. And then what he did that I think is so impactful, and what we sometimes forget today, is he knew how important talent is. And so he went out and he found the best talent hire to turn this company around, and he paid for the talent. He knew that if you're going to get the best, you need to pay the best. And so what happened then is the company hit an oil well that was successful, and then they discovered what was at the time, and probably still today, the largest gas field in all of California. And that's what gave the company the strength to go international and to go into Libya. And by the way, that discovery of that gas field in California was after majors had been drilling in the area and had not discovered it. And then we go to Libya, and in the case of the gas field, it was just moving over a little bit. In Libya, it was drilling deeper, and having the people that understood what was missed in the blocks that we got. And so he had the right people over there to follow a major and find something that they didn't. And then he continued that same kind of push with us, and that is we then went into Qatar following another major oil company who had not been increasing production for them, and we quadrupled production in a very short period of time for Qatar by applying the innovative methods that Oxy was bringing to the table. And I can tell you, looking back, I couldn't have been more wrong about what I thought about Occidental at the time. Oxy was not only innovative around strategy, but around tactics, and so they were making things happen. And Armand Hammer, he made a big deal of everything. If something was, in his view, potentially valuable enough to go after, he did it in a big way, always in grand style. And so that's what we like to do now. If there's a place we need to be, and a place that we think is important to us, then we will go all out. If we're going to do it, we don't do it partially. We do it.
Dr. Hammer, he was a visionary.
He was.
And he could see over the hill. There are certain people in any profession that they can see around the corner or over the hill, is what I call it. And he was one of those. Another one, a guy I knew, Robert O. Anderson, that was with ARCO, and he had started in Roswell. And the only thing, Robert O. Anderson and Demi Moore both started in Roswell. I met her one time and said, "I'm from Lubbock," and she said, "A big deal for me was to go shopping in Lubbock." And I said, "Chamber of Commerce will pay for an ad on that, didn't he?" And but he was great. And so you got into the international business. What was your first assignment that was overseas? My first assignment was actually I got after I had left Oxy for a couple of years to go back to Alabama. I thought it would be good for my family to go back there and to help out with some things. And after 2 years of working in coal bed methane and realizing, my family was fine, they didn't need me, I decided that I wanted to get out of coal bed methane. I didn't want to be labeled to be a coal bed methane engineer, so I wanted to get back to conventional. And so one day I get this call from Oxy. In fact, the guy that had hired me originally to go to Oxy, and he said, "Vicki, we have this opportunity in Russia. We would like you to consider coming back and going and taking that opportunity." And he said, "Would you?" And I said yes before he finished the question. And so I was all excited. First of all, very excited that Oxy needed me. That made me feel really good, needed my skills and my ability. Right.
Secondly, I thought it would be very interesting to go work in Moscow because this was right after the fall of the Soviet Union. And so I thought, this is historic time for them. This will be a great time to go and see how things are going. I found out that neither of those were true. I wasn't going to be working in Moscow. I was going to be working in Western Siberia, a little town called Nizhnevartovsk.
Western Siberia is enough to convince me, that, well, I don't believe I'll go. But
that leads to the next point. Nobody would go. So it wasn't my skill or ability. They just needed an engineer of any kind to go over there and help with this project because nobody would go to Western Siberia. No, all the Oxy people knew where it was. They knew how challenging it was. So they were doing anything else they could but go there. So I went there, and that was, for me, at the time I was about 33 years old. I had never flown on a plane outside the U.S. The only time I'd been outside the U.S. was across the Mexican border to the border towns and on a cruise to the Caribbean. Those were my experiences out of the country. So I get on this plane, headed for Moscow and then to Nizhny Bartovsk, end up flying through Frankfurt to Moscow and then overnighting in Moscow, and then through a series of weird things happening, I made it to the airport, got on the charter flight that I needed to get to Nizhny, and got to Nizhny, and that was definitely an eye-opening experience for me.
What time of year was it?
When I went was, I think it was probably March or April, but it was right before the snow melt, and the snow would melt in Nizhny around May and come back around mid-August. And so the snow there most of the time. And when you got to Nizhny and you saw everything, it didn't look quite, as bad with the snow there. But in the summer months, you could tell it was like stepping back in time about 60 or 80 years. And it was, and the buildings weren't what you would hope to see in a town. And the town was fairly good size, but it was just, again, lacking the comforts of cities here.
But you took some hard assignments.
That was a hard assignment, but it was so educational for me to start my journey. And over the next few years, I was moved to Venezuela and then Ecuador, and to see those three cultural areas, and each of them a little bit different. It was also impactful to the way I think about people, because what I found is if you get below the politicians and the people who just want power most of the time and who forget where they've come from, if you get below those people to just people like you and me, what you find is we're a lot more alike than we are different. We have the same goals and aspirations. We want our families to live a good life. We want our kids to have all that they need and to be happy. And so that was really refreshing for me, because I had a paradigm about Russians, and my paradigm was changed. Now, it will never change about some, but about the Russians that I worked with some really good people there. And it was fun to experience that and to know how things really are.
You experienced that, and then you went to Venezuela. And what year did you go to Venezuela?
So I was only working in Russia for a year, and so I went to Venezuela and got there in '92, and worked there for a little over a year.
Chavez was in power at that time.
Yes.
And so things were really starting to change.
But things were still good in '92, and the government, the operations we had was good. I was out in the field mostly doing work on wells, and so it was a good environment still at that time, and I enjoyed being there and being around the Venezuelan people. That's the first time, though, I encountered somebody who didn't necessarily want to work with me as a female engineer, and it's quite surprising it was in Venezuela, because there's a lot of, even back then, a lot of female engineers from Venezuela.
Right.
A lot of really good ones. And so there I encountered a guy who was trying to work on my very first well I'm working on, and he decided that he didn't want to work with me. It was with a guy with a service company. So I'm in the office, and I hear my supervisor, my manager, getting a call, and I hear him saying, well, she's doing the job, and if you don't want to talk to her, then you're not going to get the job. He said, because I'm not going to talk to you about this. And so he helped make sure that they started working with me.
The guy understood that. If you don't work with her, you don't get the job.
Yeah.
That's pretty. Yeah. I had a professor in English at Texas Tech used to tell us, in communication, oral or written, it's not important people understand you. It's got to be so clear and concise they cannot misunderstand you.
Exactly.
And I've always, liked that. Ecuador. Let's talk a little about Ecuador. They put you in the jungle.
It was in the jungles of Ecuador. It was the most beautiful place I've ever worked. And so imagine this. Thank God it worked in this succession, going to Russia, then Venezuela, and then Ecuador, working the the prettiest and best place last was great. And to get to where we worked at the time is you'd have to fly into Quito, the capital city of Ecuador. It's in the Andes Mountains. And then from Quito, we would take a charter flight down to a little town called Coca. It was about a 45-minute charter flight. So from the mountains down into the Amazon jungle. And the Coca was on the Napo River. And so then we'd have to get into these small boats. Each boat would carry about, I think it was 8 to 12 people. And get on a boat ride and ride 45 minutes down the river to get to our camp, because our camp was so remote. And because our camp was so remote, we had to be self-sufficient. And so we had to provide our own power, catering, housing, everything. There was nothing close. We had generated our own power. So it was the best place I ever worked. And fortunately there, I'd only stayed in trailers for my first hitch. This was rotational. And my second hitch there, we were moved into this incredible new camp. So Ecuador was by far one of the most impactful places that I worked because of the work we were doing there, and then the breadth of the things that I got to do.
Well, that's amazing. Those are top assignments. And I think back to Russia, Dr. Hammer, he had a vision about Russia. He kind of could see around the corner on that.
He did.
And that people like you got to take advantage of it. And as you later got in position to be CEO, you knew what they were talking about if they mentioned something about Russia or Ecuador or Venezuela. You've been there. That's important. You left Venezuela, you came back to the United States. And what did they have you doing then? So
I was in Ecuador when in 2000 I got a call. I worked in Ecuador from 95 to 2000. So I got a call from a guy with our company named Glenn Mangolan. And I'll say, first of all, I owe a lot to, as we're going through our careers, another important thing for people to have the opportunity to advance is to have an advocate, whether it's a formal one or informal one, to have someone in the company that sees some potential in you and then tries to help make that potential, achieve something. And so I was field manager over our Ecuadorian operations when I finished up. And when I first got there, I was running the engineering operations part of it. But Mangolan saw in me something and decided that he wanted to put me in as field manager. And again, we never had a female field manager of anywhere we operated. And so he had to go through a lot to make that happen. There were people that didn't want it to happen. So he worked hard to make that happen, which made me want to work really hard to be successful.
Right.
So that I didn't want anyone to ever be able to say to him that was a mistake. So I worked even harder than I normally do in that job to try to make sure that I made him look good for having taken a chance on me. And to me, that's trust is, and that's where I started learning that trust is such a powerful thing, because I realized what it was doing to me and for me. His trust in me made me very not only loyal to him, but work hard for him. And that working hard then benefited me a lot. And so I got the call from him after I'd been in Ecuador 5 years, and he had said, "Vicki, there's this job working Hugoton, in the Hugoton area," which when I thought of Hugoton at the time, I thought of the Hugoton gas field, which was developed, it had been being developed since the 30s or so. And
right.
I'm thinking, I'm going to go from this amazing job down here with all these incredible engineering challenges to work a shallow gas field. That's what was in my head. But I knew that if he was calling me and mentioning that job to me, he wanted me to go, because either the company needed me to be there or he thought it would in some way enhance my experience. And so I never said no to anything that was ever offered to me. So I left Ecuador, took that job, and it was hard to leave Ecuador, but took that job. And as it turned out, that job, I learned a lot about seismic in that job that I would have never learned in any of the jobs, didn't learn any of the jobs I'd had up to that point. So this was in 2000, I'm learning about seismic. And at that time, 3D seismic was starting to advance pretty rapidly. So for that to happen at that period of time in my career was pretty good timing to prepare me for what was to come with 3D, because now 3D does incredible things for us. And so, it's that what the lesson I learned from that was that it's important in whatever job you go to, first of all, try to never say no. And whatever job you go to, try to look for something to learn from it, and try to look for something that creates value for you that then turns into value for the corporation at some point. And so what we were discovering there with the 3D seismic had nothing to do with the gas fields. It was this trend of Moro oil sands,
right,
fluvial oil sands, and we had one geologist that got so good at it. I told him, I said, "You just found the smallest reservoir in the world." He found oil. It was great initial rate, but then in a week or so it was gone. And so that's what
world's smallest oil field.
Yeah, so
he probably didn't put that on his wall.
He didn't put that up, but he continued finding them though, and we turned that into a pretty good project, and with his expertise.
You told me this some time ago about an advocate, and this is really important, because I had never thought of that. I'd always thought of mentors. Mm-hmm. And it's good to have mentors, but if you got to have an advocate, if you're going to get to the top, you're going to have some people that believe in you, and that when you're not there, they're going to say some things that will help you. And I'd always thought about a mentor, somebody, and mentor, that's very important. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people can be an advocate and a mentor.
Exactly, and that's what he was, basically.
But that helped you move up.
It did.
And you were doing the right thing at that time. Then what was your next assignment?
My next assignment from Hugoton was to start a re-entry into the Rocky Mountains. Oxy had been in and out of the Rocky Mountains several times, and so this was to try to create value out of a gas property that we had there, and it was in Colorado. And so the charge was to build a business in the Rockies that would be more gas focused. And so I led that team from, I think, 2003 to about 2007. And again, every job I've ever had, I learned a lot. But the biggest thing I learned about that job is that I have zero ability to interview and select the right people for the jobs. I can't do it. It's never been a skill of mine, I've practiced it. The HR group has tried to help educate me about behavioral-based interviewing skills, and I do it, and I try to defend myself by saying that maybe it's that I just like people too much. Maybe I give people more benefit of doubt, but I'm not good at it. So I built the most dysfunctional team to work that Rockies business development group that we were trying to do. I put together the most dysfunctional team I've ever seen in my whole career.
But see, to me, that's impressive because you admit it. There's a lot of people that will never admit their mistakes, and one of my favorite sayings is bury the dead and move on. And lots of times there will be issues and ideas that are dead. Just got to put them behind you and move forward. But you recognize your strength and your weakness. And when I was chancellor at Texas Tech, I interviewed a guy one time who was being considered for a deanship. And I go in to meet with him. I said, how things going? And he said, he started, and 15 minutes later, he was still talking. He was nervous. He talked himself out of a job, But I think that's so important that you realized where your strengths were and where you needed help. And that's a good quarterback. You needed a left tackle.
I did.
And you went out and got one.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, there were a lot of good people on that team, a lot of really good people. And I couldn't...
Had them at the wrong position.
Yeah, I couldn't quite get it fixed.
Yeah. I still, what you said a while ago, is found the smallest oil field in the world. That's hilarious. if you ought to put that on his wall, but he'd probably take it down when you left.
Yeah, he's still out in the Permian. I could still do that for him.
Yeah, you still help him.
Not with Oxy. He's not with Oxy anymore, but...
Let's talk about the Permian Basin. I grew up in West Texas and knew the Permian Basin meant big oil field. And there's been so much change. There was time that people thought the Permian Basin was dying, and it was under those circumstances. But things changed. And tell us about your times in the Permian Basin. And your first one, did you live out there?
I never lived out there. And I would say that for Oxy, it was Steve Chazen's vision that got us big in the Permian, because as you were saying, when others were thinking that the Permian was done, they left. And Steve Chazen thought better. He was not only a financial guru, he was a geologist as well, so he saw the potential. He saw potential. He did.
But he saw potential in you. I think that he was a major player in from what I've read and everything of you being CEO.
He was. I wouldn't be CEO had it not been for Steve, and he laid the foundation for our company by being a visionary and buying the assets from those majors that left. So he bought the assets that made us bigger and made it the foundation of our company in 2000. And so I was able to start working Permian in 2007. A lot of people think I've worked it for a long time, but I started in 2007, so 7 years after he had bought it for us. And that was the beginning at that time of not just the conventional and EOR being important for us, but the beginning of our start of the development of the shale in the Permian. And
y'all were the first in that area on shale nationwide.
I wouldn't say we were the first, but we were the first to make a big bet on the Permian. Right. And so we bet on the Permian. We bet on the potential of the Permian. Again, Steve's decision to do that, but we saw the potential of the Permian, and I would say that we definitely were the company that saw it, because nobody else bought those assets. Nobody made that big investment, and at the time, he got a lot of backlash for that.
They were leaving, and everybody was thinking, well, "What's Oxy doing?" Exxon and all these other people are leaving, and they're saying we're here to stay.
Yep. So I do claim credit for us, thanks to his moves on that. We were committed to the Permian.
We hope you've enjoyed part one of Chancellor Hance's conversation with Vicki Hollub. In part two, she discusses a price war and a pandemic going on at the same time, also her relationship with Warren Buffett, and the big effort that Oxy is making to reduce CO2 emissions, and she shares how important Oxy's direct air capture facility is. Please like and subscribe to this podcast, and we love hearing from you. Send email to info@hancepodcast.com and follow us on Instagram @BestStorytellerPodcast.